In today's world, where technology and information reign supreme, it is easy to overlook the fact that the foundations of our thinking were laid more than 2,000 years ago. Three names, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, are not just pages in history, but living sources of ideas that still determine how we learn, argue, and seek truth. Today, their legacy permeates everything from scientific methods to moral principles, and understanding their contribution helps us realize why philosophy remains relevant in the age of digital revolutions. This story will reveal how a dialogue between a teacher and his students laid the foundation for Western civilization, promising to show that their discoveries are not abstractions, but practical tools for living in a complex world. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and let's get started. Imagine the Athenian agora, a bustling cauldron of life where merchants shout out the prices of olives, politicians deliver fiery speeches, and craftsmen argue about the quality of marble. Amidst this hustle and bustle moves a sturdy, short man with bulging eyes and a flat nose, looking more like a satyr than a sage. This is Socrates. He does not sell or buy. He seeks conversation partners. Here he stops a famous commander and asks with deceptive simplicity, "Tell me, brave man, what is courage?" The commander, unaccustomed to doubt, confidently gives his definition, and then begins what will go down in history as the Socratic method. Socrates does not argue or refute. He uses irony, pretending to be completely ignorant. "Oh, how wisely you speak, but explain to me, fool." And he asks a series of questions that seem simple at first glance. Each answer from the commander, filtered through Socratic logic, reveals new contradictions. Very soon, self-confidence gives way to confusion, and then irritation. The man who considered himself an expert in courage suddenly realizes that he cannot give it a clear definition.
This was the first stage. Socrates called the second stage maiutics, the art of midwifery. He claimed that he did not impart knowledge to people, but only helped them to give birth to their own truth, which was already hidden in their souls. He was a midwife for other people's thoughts. This process was painful because it forced people to admit their own ignorance and discard false beliefs imposed by society. Socrates' famous "I know that I know nothing" is not a pose, but a starting point for any genuine knowledge. He never wrote anything down. For him, philosophy was a living process, a dialogue of souls, which dies when recorded on silent papyrus. Everything we know about his thoughts has come down to us through the retellings of his students, primarily Plato. It is in his dialogues that Socrates appears as an intellectual titan whose questions still make us think. His method became the foundation for all Western pedagogy, where the best teacher is not the one who gives ready-made answers, but the one who teaches how to ask the right questions. The man who taught the Athenians to think became a mortal threat to Athens. The city, which had recently lost the humiliating Peloponnesian War to Sparta, was in deep crisis. Democracy was fragile, and society was looking for someone to blame. And Socrates, with his eternal doubt of authority, with his uncomfortable questions about justice, gods, and virtue, was the perfect target. His students, such as Alcibiades, became controversial figures, and the shadow of their actions fell on their teacher. In 399 BC, he was formally charged with not honoring the gods that the city honors, introducing new deities, and corrupting the youth. In essence, he was tried for dissent. The trial took place before the Heliaea, a jury consisting of 501 Athenian citizens. Instead of begging for mercy, Socrates turned this defense into another philosophical lesson. He spoke not as a defendant, but as a mentor, explaining to the judges that he had served the city all his life, acting as a kind of gadfly that stings a lazy horse, preventing it from falling asleep. As a punishment, he ironically suggested that he be given free meals for life at the expense of the state, an honor bestowed upon Olympic champions. This was not forgiven. By a narrow majority, he was sentenced to death. His friends devised an escape plan. The guards were bribed. Everything was ready. His student Crito came to the prison and begged him to run away, to save his life. But Socrates refused. He asked Crito a series of questions in his usual manner. What would the laws of Athens say if they saw me running away? Wouldn't they say that I, having lived under their protection for 70 years, am now betraying them when they have passed an unjust but lawful sentence on me? For Socrates, escape would mean admitting that laws can be broken if you don't like them. This would destroy everything he taught. The justice and fidelity to principles are higher than personal gain and even life itself. On the appointed day, he gathered his disciples around him, comforted them, and spoke about the immortality of the soul. When the cup of hemlock poison was brought, he accepted it without a trace of fear. He drank it as if it were ordinary wine at a banquet. His death, described in detail by Plato, was not a defeat, but his greatest philosophical statement. It was an act of supreme consistency, where life and teaching merged into one. He showed that personal integrity is not an abstract concept, but a choice that a person makes every day, especially when that choice costs him everything. As Plato wrote in his dialogue Phaedo, concluding the story of his teacher's last moments, "Such was the end of our friend, a man of whom we can say that of all those we knew at that time, he was the best as well as the wisest and most just."
To fully appreciate the scale of the revolution that Socrates brought about in people's minds, one must first understand against whom he waged his intellectual war. Before him, Athens was dominated by sophists, brilliant, paid teachers of wisdom, a kind of early coaches and business trainers of antiquity. They taught young people from wealthy families the art of rhetoric, the ability to persuade anyone of anything, regardless of where the truth lay. For them, there was no such thing as objective truth. Protagoras, one of the most famous sophists, proclaimed, "Man is the measure of all things." This meant that good and evil, justice and injustice were relative concepts, depending on the opinion of the majority or the benefit of a particular person. Their philosophy was the perfect tool for ambitious politicians and lawyers in democratic Athens, where the ability to speak eloquently in court or at a public assembly was a direct path to power and wealth. Socrates, on the other hand, was their complete opposite. He did not take money for his conversations, considering the trade of wisdom to be prostitution, and he believed that concepts such as goodness, beauty, and justice were not relative but absolute and universal. They simply needed to be found, stripped of the husks of opinions and prejudices. He sought not profit but truth. This obsession with truth was evident in his entire appearance and lifestyle. He served in the Athenian army as a hoplite, a heavily armed infantryman, and became famous for his incredible endurance and bravery in the battles of Potidaea, Delium, and Amphipolis. It was said that during one of the winter campaigns, when everyone else was wrapped up in furs, he walked barefoot on the ice in his only worn cloak, a himation, paying no attention to the cold. His physical toughness was a reflection of his spiritual fortitude. He was married to a woman named Xanthippe, whose name became synonymous with a quarrelsome wife. Legend has it that once, after another verbal altercation, she poured a pot of slop on his head, to which the philosopher calmly remarked, "After such thunder, I expected rain." He was not concerned with domestic comfort or public opinion. Sometimes he would fall into a strange stupor in the middle of the street or at a feast, frozen for several hours in deep meditation, completely immersed in his thoughts. This was a manifestation of his daemonion, an inner divine voice which, according to him, never advised him what to do, but always warned him against wrong or evil deeds. It was this mysterious daemonion that became one of the formal reasons for accusing him of introducing new gods. The catalyst for his entire public philosophical mission was a story related to the Delphic oracle. His ardent friend and admirer, Chaerephon, went to Delphi, to the sanctuary of Apollo, and asked the Pythia, a priestess and prophetess, the question, "Is there anyone in the world wiser than Socrates?" The oracle's answer was unequivocal: no one. When Chaerephon relayed these words to Socrates, he was deeply puzzled. He, who considered the knowledge of his own ignorance to be the pinnacle of his wisdom, was named the wisest. Socrates took this not as a compliment, but as a divine riddle that he had to solve. He decided that it was his duty to find someone wiser than himself in order to prove the god wrong. Thus began his famous wanderings through Athens. He went to politicians whose wisdom was renowned throughout Hellas, to poets who were believed to speak through the mouths of the muses, and to craftsmen whose skill was admired. And each time the same thing happened. The politician could not give a clear definition of justice, the poet could not explain the meaning of his own poems, and the craftsman, being a master of his craft, mistakenly believed that he understood everything else. In the end, Socrates came to the conclusion, "This man considers himself wise without being so, and I, since I am not wise, do not consider myself so. Apparently, I am wiser than him, at least in the small way that I do not imagine that I know what I do not know." He understood the meaning of the prophecy. True wisdom begins with an awareness of the limits of one's knowledge. His mission was to serve God by awakening his fellow citizens from their intellectual slumber. Socrates' death was not just a personal tragedy for his disciples, but a worldview catastrophe, especially for Plato. Coming from a distinguished aristocratic family, he dreamed of a political career in his youth and wrote poetry. Meeting Socrates turned his life upside down. He burned his poetic works and devoted himself to philosophy. The execution of his teacher, carried out by the Athenian democracy, turned him away from practical politics forever and forced him to seek an answer to the main question: how to build a state in which wise men would not be executed but would be placed at the helm. Immediately after Socrates' death, Plato, fearing persecution, left Athens. A long period of wandering began. He visited Egypt and then went to southern Italy, where he closely associated with the Pythagoreans, followers of the teachings of Pythagoras. It was from them that he adopted the idea that the world is based on eternal mathematical laws, and that the soul is immortal and capable of transmigration. He then made several risky trips to Sicily, to Syracuse, where he attempted to turn the local tyrant Dionysius into an ideal philosopher-ruler. This venture failed miserably. Dionysius proved impervious to wisdom, and Plato was nearly sold into slavery, from which his friends ransomed him. This bitter experience convinced him that it was impossible to change the world by influencing a single ruler. It was necessary to create something more lasting, a school that would forge entire generations of enlightened minds. Returning to Athens as a mature 40-year-old man, he purchased a plot of land in a suburban grove dedicated to the mythical hero Academus. There he founded his school, the Academy. It was not just an educational institution in the modern sense of the word. It was a kind of research institute and a brotherhood of like-minded people who lived and worked together. According to legend, an inscription hung above the entrance to the academy: "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." Why geometry? For Plato, mathematics was not just a science of numbers and figures. It was a propedeutic, a necessary preparation of the mind for the comprehension of higher truths. Geometric objects, the ideal circle, the perfect triangle, cannot be found in the physical world. Any circle drawn will be imperfect, but we can conceive of them with absolute precision. Thus, mathematics taught the mind to distract itself from the imperfect, sensually perceived world, and ascend to the world of pure, intelligible essences. It was a bridge leading from the cave of shadows to the realm of eternal ideas. Plato outlined the essence of his teaching in the famous myth of the cave, which he recounts in his major work, The Republic. Imagine people who have been chained since birth in a deep cave, facing the wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between them and the fire runs a road along which other people carry various objects. The prisoners have never seen the fire or the real objects. They see only the shadows that these objects cast on the wall, and hear the echoes of voices, mistaking them for the speech of the shadows. For them, this world of shadows is the only reality. They argue about the shapes of the shadows, give them names, and consider those who predict their appearance better than others to be wise men. Now imagine that one of the prisoners is freed and forced to turn around. The light of the fire will blind him and cause him pain. He will not be able to see real objects and will most likely decide that the shadows he is used to are much more real. If he is forcibly pulled out of the cave into the sunlight, it will hurt him even more. At first, he will only be able to look at reflections in the water, then at the stars at night, and only with time will his eyes become accustomed enough for him to look at the sun itself. And then he will understand. He will understand that the sun is the source of all light and life, the reason for everything he sees. He will realize that his entire past life in the cave was an illusion, a play of shadows. This myth is an extended metaphor for human cognition. The cave is our everyday sensory world. The shadows on the wall are the concrete things we see and touch. The prisoners are all of us, ordinary people who mistake appearance for reality. Liberation and ascension from the cave is the difficult path of philosophical education, which forces the soul to turn away from the world of things and turn to the world of ideas. The objects behind the prisoners are mathematical objects, and the sun is the highest idea, the idea of good. Just as the sun makes all objects visible and gives them life, the idea of good is the source of the existence and knowability of all other ideas. According to Plato, a philosopher who has seen the light of truth has no right to remain above, enjoying contemplation. His duty is to return to the cave, to the other prisoners. Even if they laugh at him, do not believe his stories about another world and consider him mad. Even if, in their blindness and hostility to the light, they try to kill him, a clear allusion to the fate of Socrates. The philosopher must return to try to free the others and rule over them, because only he knows what true good is, and not its shadow. This gave rise to Plato's political theory, which was a direct response to the execution of his teacher. If democracy, the rule of the majority, is capable of killing the wisest of men, then it is a flawed form of government. In his Republic, he paints a picture of an ideal polis, built not on the opinion of the crowd, but on knowledge. Society in it is divided into three classes, corresponding to the three principles of the human soul: the desiring, craftsmen and farmers; the fierce, warriors, guards; and the rational, rulers, philosophers. Each class is engaged in its own business, and this harmonious unity is the essence of justice. The most revolutionary aspect of this model is the caste of rulers. Both men and women who have undergone the most rigorous selection process and received the best education can become rulers. Until the age of 50, they study mathematics, dialectics, and other sciences, temper themselves in the service of the state, and only those who ultimately manage to see the idea of the good are given the right to rule. These rulers have neither private property nor families. They live in a community, eat at a common table, and all their thoughts are directed exclusively towards the good of the state. Plato was convinced that power can only be entrusted to those who do not seek it, who see it not as a privilege but as a heavy responsibility. Only a philosopher king who has known true reality is capable of distinguishing genuine good from its shadow and steering the ship of state through the storms of political passions. This utopian, and for many frightening, model was the first attempt in history to build politics on the foundation of reason and knowledge, and its echoes would be heard in European thought for the next 2 millennia. And so, one day, a 17-year-old boy from a distant northern province arrived at this academy, which was buzzing with intellectual life and where the most daring ideas about the soul, knowledge, and the state were discussed. He was not an Athenian. He was born in Stagira, a Greek colony in Thrace. His father, Nicomachus, was the court physician to the Macedonian king Amyntas III, the grandfather of Alexander the Great. This young man, whose name was Aristotle, brought with him a completely different mindset. If Plato was a poet and mathematician who hovered in the world of ideal entities, Aristotle was the son of a physician who had been accustomed since childhood to observation, dissection of animals, classification, and attention to concrete empirical facts. He came to the academy to study, but stayed there for 20 years, until Plato's death, transforming himself from a student into the most brilliant teacher and researcher. It is said that Plato called him the mind of his school, and jokingly said that his audience was divided into 2 parts: the body, all the other students, and the mind, Aristotle alone. He was the most devoted student, but it was he who was destined to subject the teachings of his great teacher to the most profound and thorough criticism, setting philosophy on a completely new path. The relationship between them is often described by the famous phrase attributed to Aristotle: "Plato is my friend, but truth is dearer." Although this aphorism does not appear verbatim in his works, it perfectly conveys the essence of his intellectual rebellion. Aristotle struck at the very heart of Platonism, the theory of ideas. He asked a series of devastatingly simple and logical questions. If for everything in our world, say for every specific person, there is an ideal prototype, the idea of a person, in some heavenly world, then what connects this specific person and this idea? Probably they are both involved in something third, in an idea of a higher order. And what connects the 3 of them? A 4th entity? This logical paradox, known as the third man argument, led to an endless and meaningless multiplication of entities. For Aristotle, with his natural scientific mind, this was absurd. Why double the world? Why look for the essence of a table somewhere in the world of ideas when it is right in front of us, in this very table? This is how Aristotle made his major philosophical breakthrough. He brought ideas down from heaven to earth. He argued that the essence of a thing, its form, eidos, does not exist separately from it. It is inextricably linked to the matter, hyla, of which the thing is composed. The form of a statue cannot be separated from the bronze from which it is cast. This concept, hylomorphism, became the foundation of his philosophy. The world ceased to be a pale copy of something higher. It became a unique and self-sufficient reality, worthy of the most careful study. And for this study, Aristotle created an incredibly powerful toolkit. He understood that in order to truly understand anything, be it a chair, a living being, or a state, one must answer 4 fundamental questions, which he called the 4 causes. The first is the material cause. What is it made of? For a statue, it is bronze. The second is the formal cause. What is it? What is its structure? For a statue, it is the sculptor's design, the form of Apollo. The third is the efficient or productive cause. Who or what created it? The sculptor and his tools. And finally, the 4th, most important for Aristotle, the final cause, telos. Why does it exist? What is its purpose? For a statue, to decorate a temple or glorify a god. This focus on telos, on the inner purpose, permeates his entire philosophy, from physics to ethics. He believed that everything in nature has its own purpose. The purpose of an acorn is to become an oak tree. The purpose of a knife is to cut well.
And what is the purpose of man?
Aristotle gives a clear answer to this question: eudaimonia. This Greek word is often translated as happiness, but that is too narrow. Eudaimonia is more like prosperity, a full, well-lived life, the realization of one's full human potential. And this goal can only be achieved through virtue, arete, that is, through perfection in what makes a person human, in rational activity. But how does one become virtuous? Here Aristotle again descends from the heights of abstraction to practical advice. His ethics are the ethics of the golden mean. He argues that any virtue is the middle ground between two vicious extremes, deficiency and excess. For example, courage is the middle ground between cowardice, deficiency, and reckless bravery, excess. Generosity is between stinginess and extravagance. Moderation is between debauchery and insensitivity. Finding this middle ground for each situation is a task for practical reason, for wisdom that is acquired not so much by reading books as by life experience and the habit of doing the right thing. This was an ethic not for saints, but for responsible citizens striving for harmony in their souls and in their actions. This practicality extended to his political views. Unlike Plato, who constructed an ideal state in his imagination, Aristotle acted like a true scientist. He collected and analyzed the constitutions of 158 real Greek city-states, from prosperous Athens to tiny island states. He created the first comparative political science in history. His famous definition, man is by nature a political animal, zoon politikon, did not mean that we all love politics, but that man can achieve his highest goal, eudaimonia, only in society, in the polis. Robinson Crusoe on a desert island cannot be truly virtuous, because virtues such as justice or friendship require the presence of other people.
Aristotle classified forms of government according to two criteria: the number of rulers, one, a few, the majority, and the goal of government, the common good or personal gain. Thus, the correct form of government by one is monarchy, and its perverted form is tyranny. The rule of a few best people is aristocracy, and its perversion is oligarchy, the rule of the rich. The rule of the majority in the interests of all is polity, and in the interests of only the poor is democracy, which he, like Plato, did not consider the best form. He did not seek a single correct recipe, understanding that the best form of government depends on specific circumstances, the size of the territory, the character of the people, and the level of prosperity. His ideal was polity, the rule of the middle class, which, in his opinion, was the most stable, since it suffered neither from the arrogance of the rich nor from the envy of the poor. After Plato's death, Aristotle left Athens. Perhaps he hoped to head the academy, but his place was taken by Plato's nephew, a more orthodox follower of the teachings. Aristotle went to Asia Minor, where, together with other students of Plato, he engaged in biological research, dissecting and describing marine animals. It was during this period that the Macedonian king Philip II invited him to become a tutor to his 13-year-old son Alexander. It is difficult to say exactly what Aristotle taught the future conqueror of the world, probably not metaphysics, but ethics, politics, and rhetoric. He instilled in him a love of Greek culture, and Alexander, according to legend, even took the Iliad, which his teacher had prepared for him, with him on his military campaigns. Their paths diverged when Alexander became king and set out to conquer Persia. Aristotle was a man of the polis. For him, Greek culture was the highest form of civilization, and all others were barbarians.
Alexander's cosmopolitan empire, where Greeks mingled with Persians and Egyptians, was alien to his worldview. Nevertheless, their connection had enormous consequences for science. Alexander sent his teacher samples of unseen plants and animals from his campaigns, financing his research. Upon returning to Athens, Aristotle founded his own school, the Lyceum, located in the gymnasium near the temple of Apollo Lysias.
Unlike Plato's academy, where mathematics and abstract dialectics reigned supreme, the Lyceum was a true scientific research center. It had a huge library, maps, and a collection of biological specimens. Aristotle's students were nicknamed peripatetics, from the Greek peripatos, covered gallery, because their teacher used to conduct classes while walking with them along the alleys of the garden. The scope of his work is astonishing. He wrote works on virtually all areas of knowledge at that time. He laid the foundations of formal logic by creating the doctrine of syllogism, which remained unchanged until the 19th century. He wrote physics, in which he analyzed motion, time, and space. In his treatise On the Soul, he provided the first systematic study of psychology. His Poetics remains the basis of drama theory to this day. In rhetoric, he examined the art of persuasion. His biological works, based on meticulous observations, contained descriptions of more than 500 species of animals and were unsurpassed in accuracy until the Renaissance. He was not just a philosopher, he was a walking encyclopedia, a systematicizer of all ancient knowledge. His life, like that of Socrates, ended in exile. After the sudden death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, a wave of anti-Macedonian sentiment arose in Athens. Aristotle, as the former tutor of the conqueror, was accused of impiety on the same absurd grounds as Socrates. But Aristotle did not wait for the trial. Remembering the fate of his predecessor, he left the city, saying that he would not allow the Athenians to commit a crime against philosophy twice. A year later, he died on the island of Euboea. Thus ended this incredible intellectual relay race, which lasted 3 generations. Socrates placed man and his moral quest at the center of philosophy, teaching him to ask the question, "What is this?" Plato, trying to answer this question, constructed a grandiose metaphysical system that divided reality into 2 worlds. Aristotle, in turn, rejected this division and returned philosophy to the study of a single, sensually perceptible world, creating for this purpose a scientific apparatus that determined the development of European thought for 2 millennia to come. Their legacy is not a set of rigid dogmas, but the very language in which we think, the very structure of our rational cognition. Every time we construct a logical proof, seek a middle ground in a dispute, classify objects, or reflect on the purpose of our lives, we are, without realizing it, continuing the dialogue begun by 3 Greeks on the dusty streets of ancient Athens. This is precisely why Socrates' legacy turned out to be so paradoxical and multifaceted. His circle produced not only idealists like Plato, but also thinkers who drew completely opposite conclusions. Antisthenes, for example, inspired by his teacher's contempt for material goods, founded the Cynic school. The Cynics, the most famous of whom was Diogenes, who lived in a barrel, took Socrates' idea of self-sufficiency to the extreme. They rejected all social conventions, family, state, property, and sought to live like a dog, hence the name, kenos, dog. That is, in complete accordance with nature, considering this the only path to virtue. On the other hand, Aristippus of Cyrene, who also listened to Socrates, emphasized the search for good here and now. He came to the conclusion that goodness is pleasure and founded the Cyrenaic school, which preached hedonism. How could the same person inspire both extreme asceticism and the pursuit of pleasure? Probably because Socrates did not give answers, but only pointed the way to self-knowledge. And what each person found in the depths of their soul was their own personal discovery. This duality of the physical and spiritual in Socrates fascinated his contemporaries. Alcibiades in Plato's Symposium compares him to the Sileni, ugly mythical creatures inside which statues of gods were hidden. Outwardly ugly, clumsy, resembling a satyr, but inside, divine wisdom. This metaphor became the key to understanding not only Socrates himself, but also all of Plato's subsequent philosophy, built on the contrast between the imperfect external world and the beautiful world of ideas. When creating his academy, Plato understood that lectures alone were not enough to convey such a complex teaching. That is why he chose the form of dialogue, turning the philosophical treatise into a true literary work. His dialogues are not transcripts of conversations, but carefully constructed intellectual dramas. The setting is never random. The conversation about love takes place at a banquet, about beauty during a walk outside the city walls, about the soul in a prison cell before execution. He masterfully sketches characters, clashes temperaments, weaves myths and allegories into the fabric of his reasoning. The most famous of these, after the myth of the cave, is the image of the soul as a chariot from the dialogue Phaedrus. Plato likens the soul to a charioteer driving a pair of winged horses. The charioteer is the rational principle. One horse, white and noble, symbolizes the will, the fierce spirit, the desire for glory and honor. It obeys the charioteer. The other horse, black, clumsy, and skittish, personifies animal passions, desires, and appetites.
It constantly pulls the chariot down towards the ground. The task of the charioteer, reason, is not to kill the black horse, but to subjugate it to his will, to make it move in harmony with the white horse, so that the whole chariot can soar to the heavenly heights where eternal ideas dwell. This allegory became a powerful image for the whole of European culture, vividly illustrating the inner conflict of man and the path to its resolution through the domination of reason. There is also a hypothesis that Plato did not entrust the deepest and most complex aspects of his teachings to parchment at all. This is the so-called unwritten teaching, which he imparted only to a small circle of selected disciples within the academy. According to this theory, at the basis of all existence lie two super principles, the one and the indefinite duality, from whose interaction both the world of ideas and the entire sensory cosmos are born. The dialogues were merely a popular, exoteric presentation for the general public. But perhaps Aristotle's most revolutionary achievement was the creation of the science of thinking. His logical works, later combined under the general title organon, meaning tool or instrument, were intended to become a universal tool for any science. Aristotle was the first to understand that the correctness of our conclusions depends not on the content of our thoughts, but on their form. It does not matter whether we are talking about people, planets, or triangles. The laws of logic will be the same. He analyzed the structure of a simple statement, identified categories, essence, quantity, quality, etc., developed a theory of concepts and judgments, and, of course, created the theory of syllogism, a deductive inference that allows us to obtain a true conclusion from two true premises. This was a great discovery. He gave humanity a kind of instruction manual for its own mind. His logic became the alphabet for any educated person for the next 2,000 years. However, his thinking did not stop at the visible world. He asked himself the question that lies at the heart of any metaphysics. What is the primary cause of all movement in the universe? Everything is moved by something else. A stone is moved by a hand by muscles, and so on. But this chain of causes cannot go on indefinitely. There must be some kind of prime mover, which is itself immovable, but at the same time serves as the source of all movement. Aristotle's unmoved mover is not a creator god who made the world out of nothing. According to Aristotle, the world is eternal. The unmoved mover is pure mind, eternal energy, thinking about thinking. How does it move the world while remaining immovable? Aristotle answers, as an object of love. Just as a beloved, while remaining immobile, causes movement in the lover, so the prime mover, being the highest perfection, causes the entire cosmos to strive towards it, to imitate it, to revolve in an eternal cycle. This was the pinnacle of his metaphysical thought. After his death, the fate of his works turned out to be dramatic. His main esoteric works, lecture notes for internal use, were not intended for publication. They disappeared for a long time, stored in basements damaged by dampness. It was not until the 1st century BC that they were found, systematized, and published by Andronicus of Rhodes. But for Western Europe, they were lost again after the fall of the Roman Empire. They were preserved and translated into Arabic by Muslim scholars such as Avicenna and Averroes, who commented on and developed his ideas. It was only in the 12th and 13th centuries that Aristotle's works, translated from Arabic and Greek into Latin, returned to Europe, producing the effect of an exploding bomb. His logic, physics, and metaphysics formed the basis of medieval scholasticism and university education.
Thomas Aquinas brilliantly synthesized Aristotle's philosophy with Christian doctrine, creating a grandiose system that defined the worldview of the Catholic world for centuries. Thus, the pagan Aristotle gained unquestionable authority in medieval Europe and was nicknamed the philosopher with a capital letter. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are not just links in a chain, but architects of the intellectual landscape we inhabit today. Their dialogues, schools, and theories proved that philosophy is not an abstract game of the mind, but a practical compass for navigating a complex world. From Socrates' critical thinking to Aristotle's empiricism, their ideas continue to live on in our classrooms, laboratories, and ethical choices.